On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Let me tell you a story. It starts with a community, my home, Idaho. A beautiful home with cultures and traditions. A story that mends generations together. This starts with an untold story of a Japanese-American boy, torn between two realities. A child who dared to speak up and tell the truth about the injustices during the Japanese incarceration, and his story, a veiled perspective of the truths behind the barbed wires of incarceration. A boy named Henry Miyatake. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Puyallup Assembly Center, Camp Harmony, was created. From April 28th to September 12, 1942, the camp housed Japanese Americans.
The camp itself was a kind of a bad experience for everybody, and this was the first time I was forced to sleep on hay and straw-filled cots, and we had to haul water from the center of the racetrack where we were located. This was the first time our family had to sleep in one room. So consequently, listening to everybody else over the top of the partitions, it's a great deal of discomfort.
At the age of 12, Henry Miyatake and his family were taken from their home in Seattle and forcefully relocated to Puyallup. His experience mirrors that of many other families whose rights were taken from them without the right of trial. On February 19, 1942, Executive Order 9066, issued by President Roosevelt, stated the forced removal of all persons deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast to, quote, relocation centers further inland, targeting specifically Japanese Americans. This resulted in more than 120,000 Japanese Americans being incarcerated, 70,000 of which were U.S. citizens. There were 10 concentration camps. Henry's family would be transferred to Minidoka in Idaho. Many families, like Henry's, were forced from their homes and businesses, being classified as enemy aliens. A poll from the American Institute of Public Opinion in March 1942 showed that the majority of American citizens favored the Japanese-American incarceration. To justify their incarcerations, the government and society had made two unfounded justifications for their exclusion. One, that ethnicity ultimately determines loyalty, and secondly, that indications suggest that ethnic Japanese are organized and ready for concerted action. However, none of these arguments are ultimately correct. First, an exclusion of a person based on race contradicts the basic premise on which the American nation of immigrants is built, that loyalty to the United States is a matter of individual choice and not determined by ties to an ancestral country. These injustices that violated immigrant rights are not just seen in the Japanese wartime incarceration, but have been provoked several times in the past, with events like the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned Chinese workers from immigrating or returning to the United States. Racial discrimination is not just seen in these events. This based incarceration solely on race, alienating a group of people with no right of trial or evidence behind it, as many Japanese Americans were proven loyal after searches done by the FBI. It led American immigrants and citizens to question the responsibility and failure of leadership from the government, the implementation of the Constitution, and racial prejudices that were seen. The concentration camps were a contradiction between the core values that America stands for. The rights of a person should not be determined by their ethnicity or ancestry. The immigrant dream and opportunity is what built America.
Commission came out, that was commissioned by Jimmy Carter, came out under the Reagan administration. It came up with 3 reasons why this happened: wartime hysteria, racial prejudice, and failure of government leadership.
As a high school student, Henry felt the urge to make his voice heard in the stories about his incarceration. As an assignment, he was told to write an essay for a civics class. The topic, American Democracy, What It Means to Me.
It was a collection of all my frustrations about being in the camp and all the things that really caused me concern about what was happening to us. There was 13 pages of stuff that I wrote.
Miss Ammerman, Henry Miyatake's teacher, wouldn't accept the essay for a grade. Now, not only were his rights as an American citizen being ripped away, but his freedom of speech as well. It presented him with a choice: to consent to the treatment he had been given, or to advocate for his rights as an Asian American with the risk of not being able to graduate high school.
When I had the confrontation with the principal, I told him, this is what was taught in the class, and this is what's in the Constitution of the United States. Why shouldn't I be able to exercise it?
Henry felt that he should have his rights as an American citizen. It was taught in the Constitution. Why was this being denied?
Henry wrote about his feelings during this really traumatic and influential event. I think Henry writing and reflecting on his views of what does democracy mean was important, especially during this time. And it's something that we can learn from kind of throughout time. We can always reflect on what does democracy mean, even to events today.
It wasn't just Henry Miyatake that wanted to raise the truth of what was happening. In an article published on September 1st, 1987 by user J. Takeshita states the highlighted section above, which showcases his outlook as a student during the Japanese wartime incarceration. He expresses how the teaching of civics, the importance of maintaining American principles stated in the Constitution, presented him with a challenge and goal we're striving for as American citizens. This shows the widespread impact that the infringement of the Constitution in the form of concentration camps had not just on these high school students, but their communities. Henry Miyatake was not only representing his thoughts as an individual being incarcerated, but representing the hundreds of thousands of people who were also in concentration camps. Henry Miyatake spoke out against this blatant denial of the Constitution and did so boldly. By the late 1970s, many Nisei had rebuilt their lives while setting incarceration aside. After nearly 30 years of a wall of silence, many incarcerees were hesitant to fight for an advocacy movement to address the concentration camps. They had jobs and their children, Sansei, were now adults finished with college. Henry was a Korean War veteran and had graduated from the University of Washington without a high school diploma. However, after getting a job at Boeing, Henry experienced several instances of racist treatment. He reflected on his experience and responded with this: "It made me think we're going to have to do something to have people reappraise their position for Japanese Americans." That something was redress. In 1973, Miyatake would attend a meeting of the Seattle chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League, JCL, representing the Asian Engineers and Technical Employees Association. Henry, inspired with the same passion that fueled his high school self, found himself feeling the responsibility to spread awareness about the mass injustice of the Japanese wartime incarceration. Henry would later develop the Seattle Plan. The plan was not only a campaign for justice, but rather a way to heal and prevent history from repeating itself. It was a plan to unite a community of not only Japanese Americans, but also minority, immigrants, and Americans alike. These efforts would evolve into the first ever Day of Remembrance, a collaborative effort with key figures such as Frank Abe, Karen Saraguchi, Kathy Wong, Frank Chen, and Henry Miyatake, volunteers for the JACL. This aimed to recreate the expulsion from Seattle to Puyallup, encouraging incarcerees to remember the concentration camps and stand for redress with your family.
What the Day of Remembrance did was legitimize the idea of redress, and the fact that 2,000 people came out in Seattle for that first event, showed the others in the country that it was safe to talk about it, that there would be no white backlash, no angry mobs to throw rocks at us for speaking out. And this was, again, the spark that launched the popular campaign for redress. And without Henry, it wouldn't have happened.
The Day of Remembrance was a very sobering event where at first, all these feelings that were hidden began to surface. And when you listened to the speakers and realized, that what a massive injustice this had been, that was the start of it.
The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors, surviving Japanese Americans, of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
Henry Miyatake's story is one of not only his sense of responsibility to uphold his part as a Japanese-American individual, but to undertake such a task with humility, a symbol for the broader community of those affected by the Japanese wartime incarceration. Advocating for Asian American and minority rights is not simply about seeking justice, but fostering societal awareness of past injustices and preventing ongoing systemic disparities.